Chapter 29. It took another 3 days of sleeping and healing before Matt would let Alex out of bed for more than the bathroom. She was more than ready. The company had been good, but she was used to being busy and active. Being stuck in bed, staring at the same four walls for days was making her nuts. "Let's start with downstairs to eat," Matt said, his voice firm. "We can discuss more when we see how you feel after that." They'd been arguing for 10 minutes. He'd started out telling her to wait until dinner to go down to eat, but she'd stood her ground. She was okay with waiting to see how she felt, but she wasn't waiting another day to get out of the house. She hadn't told him that yet though. She was learning to pick her battles and when Matt wasn't going to budge. "All right. I can live with that. Let's go." She finished buttoning her shirt and turned for the door. He stayed close, maybe 2 steps behind her. While his hovering irritated her, she knew he was worried about her, so she resisted the urge to snap at him. In the kitchen, she went first to her mother and gave her a hug. "Thanks so much for everything, Mom." Her mother's arms went around her. "I didn't expect you down so soon." She insisted, Matt said behind her. "I may not be completely healed yet, but I can get up and move around." She pulled away from her mom and sat in one of the chairs belonging to her small kitchen table. "Besides, I couldn't take being trapped in my bedroom any longer." She watched her mom move around the kitchen as she finished putting the meal together. Seeming satisfied that Alex wasn't going to hurt herself sitting at the table, he fixed her a drink, then helped with lunch. After eating what had seemed like the enormous amount of food they put in front of her, Alex leaned back in her chair and looked out the kitchen window. She was more tired than she'd expected to be, but she wasn't going to let it keep her from going outside. She might not get any farther than the front porch, but she had to get outside. She waited while Matt cleared the table and watched while he rinsed the dishes and loaded the dishwasher, taking the opportunity to regain some of her energy. Her side throbbed when he wasn't close, but it wasn't the searing pain that made her want to throw up anymore. "You ready to go back upstairs?" He turned back to her, drying his hands on a kitchen towel. "Nope." Pushing herself out of the chair, she headed toward the front of the house. "Where do you think you're going?" he asked, following. "Outside." She walked carefully. Movement made her side hurt more, plus she ached all over. Her body had been working so hard to repair the gashes across her ribs and the worst of her wounds, it hadn't gotten to the minor ones yet. She still had a good number of cuts and scrapes that had scabbed over. They were healing, just not faster than normal for non-shifters. The bruises all over her arms and torso were starting to fade, but having spent days in bed had done nothing for working out the soreness, and she was more than a little stiff. She opened the front door and stepped out onto the wide porch. She went all the way to the edge where the steps started, before stopping. Closing her eyes, she tilted her head back and reveled in the feeling of the sun on her skin. She'd missed this in a way she didn't have the words to express. She didn't know how long she stood there, letting the sun warm her skin and soak into her brain, before she straightened and turned back to Matt. He stood behind her, watching her with an odd look of wonder on his face. "What?" she asked as she went to the swing hanging to one side of the porch and sat. Matt followed, sitting beside her. "Nothing really, I just realized again how beautiful you are." Alex rolled her eyes. Beautiful wasn't the way she thought of herself. She was attractive enough, but that wasn't what mattered to her. To her, it was more important that she was able. She could do whatever needed to be done, or at least pitch in and help get it done. She might not be the best or the most skilled, but she was willing to do whatever. She was a good person. At least she thought so. She helped when she saw someone needing something she could give, and tried to do what was right no matter what situation she found herself in. Pretty or beautiful wasn't important. "You don't like being called beautiful?" He tilted his head to one side while he watched her. Appearance is something I have little control over. She shrugged on shoulder. I can choose to be a good person. I can choose to work hard and help people. My appearance is nothing more than good genetics. Baby, I wasn't just talking about your looks. Don't get me wrong. I like the way you look, but I meant inside. He took her hand with his, weaving their fingers together. The way you stood there and let the sun shine on you, focused on it, that's not something you see often. I could tell you had missed it, which tells me you spend a lot of time in it. He took a breath. After seeing the rest of your body, I'd say you probably spend a good deal of that time working. I know you love your friends and would give them anything you could. I haven't missed that you've called Rebecca every day since that first day, to check in and see how she's doing. I've also heard you commiserating with her about being stuck in bed. He tilted his head over until his cheek touched the top of her head. It will be very easy to fall in love with you. Her heart skipped a beat. He didn't say he loved her, not exactly. But it made her heart soar. She didn't know how to respond, so she didn't. Instead, she dropped her head to rest on his shoulder. They sat together on the swing and watched the shadows move across the yard. The next morning, Alex woke aching to get out of the house, and not just to sit on the porch either. She needed to get away from the house, to see other people, and not feel like she was trapped in her house. Without bothering to tell Matt what she was planning, she showered and got dressed. The gouges on her ribs had been allowed to scab over, and were now little more than deep cuts. She had more movement though, because she'd forbidden Matt from absorbing her pain anymore. She was still sore. He'd argued, but had finally agreed because of her reasoning. She'd told him it was no longer a debilitating pain, and the soreness left would keep her from accidentally re-injuring herself because she couldn't feel when it hurt and stop moving. He couldn't come up with a good response to that. Since Matt was no longer limited to staying within a few feet of her, he'd gone down to make breakfast just before she'd gotten in the shower. Before he had a chance to bring it up to her, she went downstairs to eat. She had no intention of letting him talk her out of leaving this morning. That looks good. Alex stretched up and kissed Matt on the cheek as he stirred a large skillet of scrambled eggs, then went to the fridge and pulled out a pitcher of orange juice. You look nice, Matt said as she poured herself a glass. She turned to face him, the pitcher still in her hand. You want some? Sure. He kept the eggs moving. Where do you plan on going, all dressed up like that? He looked her up and down, his eyes lingering on her sandals for several seconds before going back to what he was doing. I thought I might go see Rebecca. She poured a second glass of juice, then put the pitcher back in the fridge. I have no doubt she's getting tired of being stuck in bed, and I want to see her for myself. Matt was silent for several seconds. I guess we can go over there. It will give JV a chance to look you over and make sure you're healing all right. Alex resisted the urge to roll her eyes. She knew she was healing just fine, but she'd let her friend double-check it if it made Matt feel better. Do you want your juice there, or at the table? Table. He dished the eggs onto the 2 plates sitting beside the stove, then took them to the table. Alex took the juice and sat down as he went back to the stove. He pulled 2 plates covered with foil from the oven. Bumping the oven door closed with his knee, he carried the dishes to the table and uncovered them, before sitting down. Since sausage is what I found in the freezer, I assumed it's what you prefer. He picked up a couple of discs and put them on his plate. How many? I'll start with 3 and 2 of the biscuits. She nodded at the second plate. Actually, I don't have a preference, I just caught a sale and stocked up on this. She took the bread and buttered it right away, then set it on the edge of her plate while she devoured the rest of her meal. Biscuit still on her plate, she got up. What's wrong? Matt started to follow. Sit down, I'm just getting something. What did I forget? He watched her move around the kitchen. Nothing you could have known about. She pulled a jar of dark honey from the cabinet, and a spoon from the drawer, before going back to the table. Matt watched with a confused frown as she took off the lid. What is it? He finally asked. She dipped her spoon in and pulled it out, turning it to coil the drip around the ball on the spoon. Honey. I've never seen honey that dark. She had to admit, it was nearly as dark as coffee. It's a local honey, not something you can get anywhere else. It's my favorite. She drizzled the dark nectar onto both halves of one biscuit, then ate it before repeating the process with the second. Want to try some? She pointed to the plate with several biscuits left. Sure, Matt said, but instead of reaching for the bread, he surprised her by grabbing her wrist and sticking her honey and butter-coated fingers in his mouth. Heat raced through her, and her stomach flip-flopped as he ran his tongue over and over her fingers, removing all traces of the treat. Her mouth went dry as she met his gaze. His half-closed, lust-darkened blue eyes made moisture pool between her legs. You are a tease. She pulled her hand back. Even if we were ready for that, I know you. You wouldn't let me until I'm all healed, for fear of my hurting myself. She couldn't help but smile. At the rate we're going, do you think it's far off? He watched her, waiting. She thought about it for a couple seconds. I'd say if I wasn't taking so long healing, it probably would have happened. So it's close. We both know it. I've decided to seduce you. I'm gonna use everything in my arsenal to convince you to fall into bed with me. The fun way, not like we have been. What if JV says I'm not healed well enough? Then we wait. Or if you're just not ready yet, just say the word and we'll wait. Not that I'm gonna stop trying to convince you. But the final choice is yours, remember that.